All right, and so I had talked about with industry and labor that Roosevelt is going to have a couple of the programs, be struck unconstitutional, and he feels like in his second New Deal, he wants to do more. And so a couple of things that he does with labor during the second New Deal is the Wagner Act. This might also be known as the National Labor Relations Act. Um, and the Wagner Act is going to the Wagner Act will create the National Labor Relations Board, and this is going to be a government agency, and this is going to foster the organization of unions and protect their right to bargain collectively. And so once again, you start to see, this is why labor is part of that Roosevelt or that New Deal coalition, because you're going back to the times of progressivism where you see government trying to attempt to do things to help out unions, and to protect their rights to collective bargaining, and to help out their situation. The Fair Labor Standards Act is another thing that helps out with labor, and this is passed in 1938. This bill is going to require all industries involved in interstate commerce to establish a maximum hours per week and minimum wage standards. The goal here is a 40-hour week at 40 cents an hour wage. Hence, it's kind of where we get that 40-hour week and we get the minimum wage. This is the first time you really see the federal government step in and establish a minimum wage for industry. During this time, businesses complained that these are impossible standards to meet. There's no way we can do this. But even so, with all this kind of pushback from businesses, farm workers, service employees, domestic workers like housekeepers, they're excluded from the bill, which meant that its protections were not extended to many women and minorities in these occupations. So you might want to remember that as far as how did the New Deal help out certain groups of society. Women minority are sometimes they feel like they're left out in some instances here with the New Deal program. And the same year, 1938, the Committee for Industrial Organization changed its name to the Congress of Industrial Organization, and this is going to be a nationwide, essentially union that's headed up by John Lewis that will bring in skilled and unskilled workers. So once again, you start to see the labor movement picking back up during the 1930s. Another thing that happens before before the second New Deal was the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA, is an electricity project. Electricity, or the electricity industry, attracted a lot of new dealers. They wanted to stop the price gouging that the utility companies had been exhibiting in years prior, and they wanted to bring electricity to the rural areas. So in 1933, the New Deal puts in a program called the TVA. This centers along the Tennessee River Valley. The Tennessee River Valley in the southeast, it's badly eroded from flooding, and the population was especially hard hit by the Depression. Very, very poor. And so this is the ideal location for a pilot program or pilot project of such impressive proportions. And so FDR promoted and Congress passed the TVA. And with the TVA, more than 20 dams on the Tennessee Tennessee River are going to be built. And these dams are going to prevent flooding and provide power to generate electricity for the entire region. Building this flood control and power generating system employed thousands of workers and helped bring needed dollars to the local population. Erosion in this area is all but eliminated, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, restored much of the land to the forest. The TVA was a notable success in spite of efforts by privately owned utility companies to discredit the achievement. And this is one of these New Deal programs that you'll still see around even today. Dealing with housing and Social Security, we have a couple New Deal programs to talk about. The first one will be the Federal Housing Administration. This was created in 1934. The Federal Housing Authority or Administration. The purpose is to make small loans to homeowners for home improvements or completing construction on a home. The project was well received, and in 1937, Roosevelt supplemented it with the U.S. Housing Authority, once again aimed at sponsoring new home construction. Housing funds for these programs were allocated for over 500,000 low-income families. But unfortunately, the initiative was obstructed by interest in the real estate and construction businesses who felt like government-sponsored low-income housing would interfere with their livelihood. And so you didn't see it, help out as many people as it had intended because of, some special interests getting in the way. But however, enough housing was built to get many families out of the worst of these urban slums, or those essentially those shanty towns, and housing assistance through the FHA actually continues today. So it's another example of some New Deal programs that we still see today. Social Security, I mentioned this before. That's going to be put into place in 1935. Plan is funded by mandated contributions from both workers and employers. These Social Security payments at first were either from $10 to $85 a month, but it had regularly increased to keep up with inflation. These programs covered unemployed, dependent children, retirees, and the handicapped. So if you can't work, we're going to do something for you so you're not left out to dry. Banks and big businesses, one of the things that needed the most reform was the stock market. Insider trading had allowed people to manipulate the market and make fortunes at the expense of others. And so during the first 100 days of this emergency session, the first 100 days of the New Deal, Congress passed the Truth in Securities Act. And this called for complete disclosure concerning the stock before it was sold. No more insider trading. In 1934, Congress is going to solidify this fair trading policy by creating the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. The Securities and Exchange Commission is going to set rules and regulations concerning trading. That's hopefully, or the goal was, to put all investors on a level playing field. So we see that a lot of these programs being put in place, and we see Roosevelt having a reasonable amount of success. And, heading into, 1936, by putting these programs into place and by seeing it, achieve moderate success, Roosevelt was able to win re-election in 1936. And maybe perhaps taking, his easy victory too much to heart, Roosevelt began casting a resentful eye towards a conservative Supreme Court, which had actually declared seven of his New Deal programs, unconstitutional. We talked about a couple with the NRA and the AAA, and FDR said that these Supreme Court justices, 6 of them were over the age of 70, and there were 9 old men on the bench, and they kept killing these New Deal programs, and they weren't allowing him to do what he wanted to. So he comes up with a plan in 1937, and this is his court packing scheme. In his court packing scheme, Roosevelt's going to ask Congress to allow him to add a justice of his choosing to the Supreme Court for every justice over 70. He set a maximum number of judges at 15. His rationale was that the Supreme Court was behind in its work and needed younger justices to carry the load. Unfortunately, though, this was an overreach by FDR. He had a huge backlash against his court packing scheme. People felt like Roosevelt was attempting to upset the system of checks and balances. Some went as far as to accuse Roosevelt of preparing the way to take over as dictator. Remember that broad executive power he had talked about in 1933, and people started ending their prayers and God bless the Supreme Court. So Roosevelt definitely made a mistake there. But on the other hand, this court packing challenge must have sounded something of a wake-up call to justices who began to view Roosevelt's programs in a more sympathetic light. And ironically, during his 4 years as 4 terms as president, Roosevelt would be called on to name 9 judges to the Supreme Court on account of retirement and deaths. So time provided him with the court he wanted. Had he been a little bit more patient, he could have avoided a damage and fight. So we start to see here, 1936, 1937, you know, the twilight of the New Deal, and feeling that the worst of the depression was over and the economy was strong enough to be kind of taken back from this pump priming. In early 1937, Roosevelt backs off from federal employment programs in an attempt to reduce deficit spending and fulfill his campaign promise of a balanced budget. But, however, the economy was not as robust as Roosevelt had hoped, and it was also beginning to feel the pinch of a new Social Security payroll tax. And you put this, these two things together, and in 1938, you see the country slipping back into a deep recession, wiping out most of the gains that had been made since 1933. This is going to be known as the Roosevelt recession. And so, in the face of this setback, Roosevelt's going to begin employing the economic theory of John Maynard Keynes, or what's called deficit spending or Keynesian economics. And Keynes argued that in a recession, government should use deficit spending and expect to make up the losses in good times through increased tax revenues. So spend money that you don't have, go into the red, and as you put money into the economy, when it gets back on its feet, you can eliminate these losses that you had accrued through higher taxes. And so this is when you start to see Roosevelt get that that idea of big government spending and stuff. Unfortunately, for Roosevelt and the New Deal, as he started this deficit spending, and started, employing Keynesian economics, the congressional elections are going to happen in 1938, and the Democrats are going to lose about 80 seats in the House, and but gave up control of the legislature. And you started to see, in response of this deficit spending and this big government programs, you started to see, a counter group or a faction to the New Deal coalition, which could be dubbed a conservative coalition that was growing in Congress. And now this conservative coalition could successfully block Roosevelt's legislation, and no more New Deal programs are going to be passed after 1939. And so, when you're looking at the New Deal and you're trying to evaluate the New Deal, you do want to look at, the successes of the New Deal, and the benefits that it brought to the American people and to the American economy. But you also want to look at it, was it a raw deal? Who didn't it help? Did it really end the economy? What about the promises of a balanced budget? What about the whole idea of government control and how much control and influence the government or one president can have, over the economy? And I would encourage you to look in your book in the chapter on the New Deal right at the end, and there's a section labeled New Deal and Raw Deal, and that gives you a good idea of the two arguments or the debate that is still being being talked about today about Roosevelt and the legacy that his administration and the New Deal has, as far as how it approached the Depression, and how it approached government's relationship with the citizens. And so really look at those 2 pages there, and that will help you out as far as evaluating this New Deal and the successes and failures that we saw with it.